There's a moment in this episode where a character introduces themselves and gives their pronouns, but she says her pronouns, she, her, with such venom at the villain, and I loved it. That's like a new twist on pronouns, and I am here for it. Let's just introduce our pronouns with venom at people that we hate. Like, save it for the transphobes. Like, my pronouns are she, fucking, her. Not that I'm fucking her. All right, we're going to stop. Hello, interwebs. How are you all doing? Because I am here to review the latest episode of Doctor Who Series 2 Intergalactic Song Contest is the name of the episode. I should have said that earlier. Anyways, I am a little bit delirious because I have quite literally just gotten home from a trip to visit my family. That is why this review is a couple days late. I was back home for my sister's graduation this past weekend. She just graduated from her undergrad. And I also got to meet my newly born nephew this weekend as well. He is newly born, literally 2 months old. He barely can see. He's just looking at lights, but he was absolutely adorable and cute. And I am now an aunt, so that makes me very, very happy. So that is why this is a little bit late, but I hope you understand. I have more important things to do. I love y'all. But I'm an aunt, and I have to revel in that for a little bit. So there you go. You just have to wait behind that. But that being said, I didn't want to keep you waiting for too much longer. So I literally have walked in the door 5 minutes ago, and I am ready to review this for you because I watched it on the plane. I really like this episode quite a lot. The first thing to know about this episode actually is that it is written by one Juno Dawson, who is a trans woman whose work I have encountered in the Doctor Who realm before because she wrote, I think like 2 or 3 years ago, maybe, yeah, it's about 2 or 3 years ago, the Doctor Who audio drama called Doctor Who Redacted, which I really, really liked. It was very, very fun, had a cool twist on it. I don't want to spoil it for you, but I'd highly recommend seeking it out, and it was actually one of the better 13th Doctor stories, so I'd highly recommend it. The only other thing, though, I do know that she's written in the Doctor Who realm is a novel that I did not read, but my friend Vera Wild over at the Council of Geeks channel read, and she disliked it heavily, mainly because it fell into a trope that she and I both dislike, even though I have not read the book, so I'm just telling you what she thought, which was kind of the, like, looking down on religion thing that science fiction can often fall into. Some of my favorite science fiction shows like Babylon 5 are critical of religion, especially in an institutionalized form, but often there's this like discounting of people who have faith or religious belief that can happen in science fiction that the book kind of fell into. So I have not read the book, so I can't really judge it, but there's a 50-50 shot with her, but I've generally liked her work from what I've encountered of her, and this episode is no different. It does like saddle up really closely to a trope that I normally dislike, but it does just manage to swerve out of the way of it. It's just one that I wish had been given a little bit more exploration, and I think that is ultimately going to be my biggest critique that I'll circle back to, which is I really like this episode. It needed more time, especially with its central sort of discussion of the Heliens. I think they had a lot of characters in this episode with the Heliens that I think actually gave a great scope to Helien society and reactions to being exploited by corporations and colonization that I think was actually really, really interesting, but I wish we had actually had more time with each of the characters. They all had an interesting perspective, and because we got so many of them, I think like we get a little bit short shrift on not only that, but even the pitch of this episode, which is the fact that this is a send-up of Eurovision, which just to let you know, I am not someone who's, I've never really watched Eurovision. I have some friends who are all about it, though a little less so because of stuff with Israel the past few years, understandably so, and rightly so. They're big into Eurovision. I'm not that I don't like it or don't care. It's just something that I've never really gotten into. It's not where my autistic brain is going to hyperfixate on. Take my gay card for that, but it's just not something I've ever been super, super interested in. Hey, this is Editing Jessie here. So as I was editing this review, I ended up thinking about it a little bit more, and I'm going to chalk this up to I had just gotten back from the plane, which is why I didn't immediately sort of think about and clock this, though I should have. But I want to add this context in here because while I am about to, as you'll see, and I'm going to leave it in because I think it's worth at least leaving in, praise this episode in a lot of ways for getting some decent nuance into a lot of the situation that this episode tries to address allegorically. allegorically. The more I sit with it and the more I think about it and the more I watch even my own review, I think there's actually a lot more to discuss here, especially as this episode relates to Eurovision. So to start off, I want to jump in here and give a little bit of context for that note on Israel that I said, just in case you don't know about it. I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs of all of this, but Eurovision is a contest that tries to say it is apolitical, and yet will take stances on people like Russia and say Russia can't compete because of their invasion of Ukraine, and yet will not take that same stance with Israel as it is currently genociding Palestinians in Gaza and has been ethnically cleansing Palestinians forever. And Israel itself in Eurovision just this past weekend tried to game the system to win and get ahead, to use it as a propaganda tool for its country as they are trying to launder their reputation while they are doing a genocide of Palestinians. So that is obviously the background with Eurovision. And obviously, as we'll get into in just a little bit, this episode is allegorically trying to get at that. And while I, as you'll see, praised the episode initially, I didn't even really think about the metaphor. I should have, and I'm just saying, please, if you have that criticism of me, I should have gotten it. But I'm going to chalk it up to, I was on a plane and tired, but I at least want to leave it in because I think there is a little bit of praise that I do want to give this, but I do think it is ill-advised to have done it this way in this episode, and I want to inject that with editing version of me throughout this review. So you'll see me at least one more time in this review. And that being said, I was excited to see what they were going to do with this, and I will say the Eurovision part of this kind of is the element that I think gets a little bit short-shrifted in the fact that we don't get a lot of songs. Like, the setup is really cool. I like the fun energy. Like, it's really great. And the songs that we do get, especially the one at the end, I think are really excellently deployed. But it almost feels like if you're going to do a Eurovision-style episode, you should have a little bit more, like even one more song than we ultimately ended up getting. And sadly, we didn't. Apparently, this was the most expensive Doctor Who episode that they've ever made, or one of the most expensive Doctor Who episodes ever made. You can definitely see it, but I wish we had gotten just a tad bit more on that end of things. But it is really fun. Going a little bit further into this, I am a little sad. I'm getting my criticism out of the way because I will have some positive things to say about this episode. These are all like minor criticisms. They aren't like fully like tossing it under. I am a little bit sad that we're seeing Belinda already kind of gung-ho for the Doctor. I get what the episode's trying to do because she needs to be sort of like, yeah, I really like the Doctor, so that when we get the twist of the Doctor getting angry and going too far, which is something that he does from time to time, and I always like seeing that element of the character. I think it works, but I think to have a good reaction to that, Belinda ends up going a little bit too far away from what I've kind of liked about her initial setup this season, which was that she was a reluctant companion for the Doctor. She didn't want to be traveling with him as much. Not that she hated him, but it wasn't something she was like fully gung-ho for. Whereas here, she's not fully gung-ho. She kind of, she sort of only stays because, oh, look, it's a Eurovision style thing that we're here at. But she is a little bit more excited and into the Doctor. And when I say into, not romantically, you know what I mean, then I kind of would have liked her to be. I liked her being a little bit more reticent and a little bit more critical of him that we got way back in the first episode of this season. So I would have liked to see a little bit more of that energy. And it kind of comes back around towards the end, but not even enough. She's not even so put off by his, you put ice in my heart and I'm going to make you pay, sort of revenge, sort of stuff going on here that I would have really liked her to ultimately be. So a little bit of a negative on that front. However, jumping into the positive stuff, I really, really, really liked the way that the Heliens were used here. I mean, it's a little on the nose in the sense that, like, oh, they're a group of people that have horns and they're called Heliens, so people are biased against them. But I liked the nuance that it wasn't just the way they looked that everyone was biased against, but it was the fact that they have been propagandized against by the corporation that colonized their planet, and we ultimately learn. And it never goes out of the way to tell you that. Like, the show doesn't like explicitly say that that's what happened. But you get the implication that that is exactly what happened, that the corporation exploited their resources, took everything they wanted for just honey flavoring, which is totally something a corporation would do. They would colonize a planet and take it just because it would like make their profits go up for something so silly and ridiculous and ruin something so beautiful to a culture like these poppies are, which obviously has resonance in UK society more than the US as well for being a symbol over there. But yeah, like extracting this beautiful thing from this culture to just steal for profit and exploit. and would propagandize to make these people look terrible and say, you don't need to care about them because they're terrible people. They look like devils. So of course they're awful and evil. You don't need to care. And it never says that outright, but I like that it is very much implied. And I love the different characters that we get to show the different reactions to Helien society. Starting off, I think, with Cora, who is this singer. She's gone into performance art, into singing, and she's like at Eurovision, but she has to hide her horn. She has to shave them down herself to pass in this society, which you can clearly tell that there's a trans resonance going on there. Obviously, it's not just a trans thing at all, but obviously you can definitely tell a trans writer sort of like is probably thinking of those things, one would assume. But obviously that's a thing that not just trans people go through, but any minority that tries to assimilate will sometimes literally shave off the things that makes them different if they're able to, in order to pass or not be seen by society and not be people be prejudiced against them. So I like seeing that she did that, and she has a deep regret about that. And other members of the Heliens, including that one girl who clearly has an affinity for her, I forget her name, is judging her for. We had a similar thing in the Star Trek Strange New Worlds episode in season 2, where we had something with Una having a similar conversation as well with another element of her race, I guess, species, alien group. So I really thought that was really smart. And then we get Kid, who is the trope that I mentioned, is something that I generally get really reticent about is in TV shows and movies when they do a revolutionary group fighting against colonization or exploitation or an exploitative system that has marginalized them and going too far and causing just damage for damage's sake, and the show can eventually finger wag at them and say like, oh well, I don't disagree with your motives, but your methods just go too far here. Hey, so this is future editing Jessie again here, and I'm going to cut out a little. And in this section that I'm going to be sort of editing around here, I praised to a degree the depiction of Kid because it was clear to me that the episode was doing the thing, and this is the trope that I generally really hate, which is the revolutionary who goes too far. The sort of example of this being the Flag Smashers from Marvel. That is one of the perfect depictions of this. They're a revolutionary group who we may understand, but they go too far with their actions. And Kid represents the ultimate version of this here too, which is he is someone who's been colonized from a colonized and exploited group, and he wants to get back at them, and he chooses to do that by trying to mass murder innocent civilians, literally trillions of people. And it is with people that have nothing necessarily to do, like people who may be bystanders or not looking at it or maybe even enabling it, but are not necessarily directly involved and basically just doing the wrong thing, quote unquote, when trying to deal with colonization. And it sort of implies that there is a good way to deal with it when you're fighting back against people who are colonizing you. And again, there's a lot of nuance and discussion in there, and I think that this episode briefly tries to gesture at some of the nuance, because we have a moment here, and I talked about this in my first version of this, where the doctor says to Kid, oh, I know people like you actually don't want to fight for people's rights. You don't want to fight against colonization. You don't want to fight these things. All you want to do is actually kill people. But then the episode goes and shows the doctor getting revenge and cruelly torturing Kid. And I think what the episode is trying to do, I actually praised this in my initial review, and because I think there is something interesting here, which is to say the doctor's criticizing Kid, and yet to a degree he's doing the same thing to Kid. He is saying, Kid, you don't really want revenge, you just want to hurt people. But then the doctor tries to get revenge by hurting Kid, doing the same thing that he said Kid was doing, but criticizing Kid for. And I think we're supposed to understand the doctor was actually wrong in his assessment of Kid. And I think that is a good nuance and a good understanding to show, but given this episode directly pulling from Eurovision and directly pulling from Eurovision as a thing, and I'm not going to say you can't enjoy Eurovision. You can. I think it's fun. People enjoy it. It's a whole thing. I think it's ridiculous to think that it's not political because it's literally about countries competing against each other, but that's neither here nor there. But given that what's going on with Eurovision right now and Israel, And the fact that this episode is so clearly trying to at least nod and allegorize what's happening with Israel Palestine and recognizing it here in some way. If you're going to draw that nuance, you need to be very, very clear about who the people you're criticizing are and how you're criticizing them, because the problem is not the Heliens. It is not them. It is the corporation. And while this episode talks about the corporation and has issues with the corporation, this episode reserves much more of its explicit critique for someone like Kid. And while we get a sort of spectrum of reactions to Kid from other Heliens, the only other major Helien that we get two other ones. One who is sort of working with Kid, but not necessarily super vocal about trying to, clearly has an issue with what he's doing, but still helping and enabling him. And then we get Cora, who I'll talk about I'll leave my initial discussions of her up because I still think they kind of stand. She is sort of one more no, we can try and get people to recognize her humanity, and she'll recognize the harm that's happening to her, but she's sort of more not necessarily using violence. And I think that is an irresponsible kind of thing to do right now in the light of what is happening between Israel and Palestine, and the fact that this episode is clearly trying to allude to that while not exactly nodding at it. And while I do think that this episode has some level of nuance in how it depicts the Doctor's criticism of Kid, I think given the very real world things happening right now, the episode needed to be much more explicit instead of leaving it sort of intuit it, and be much more clear in what it was trying to ultimately say. And I think it should have been much more clear in giving Kid a little bit more empathy, in the sense, explicit empathy, in the sense of saying, oh, I understand why you're doing this, and I understand where you're coming from. Maybe not killing trillions of people, but I understand where you were coming from and what is happening and why you were doing this, instead of just blanket saying you're going about this the wrong way. Because that is just that example of saying I agree with your motives, but not your methods, and ultimately creating a blanket statement without looking at the actual power dynamics at play here, and how something like Eurovision can launder the reputation of someone like Israel. Because Eurovision, this International Galactic Song Contest, is being sponsored by a corporation, just like Israel is allowed to take part in Eurovision. And while the episode nods at that same idea, it really doesn't address the Intergalactic Song Contest, aka Eurovision's complicity in that. In being a part of that. And no, it just has this moment of let's celebrate having fun in songs and da-da-da, and look, songs can humanize groups of people, without necessarily addressing the complicity in what Eurovision or the Intergalactic Song Contest is doing in this situation for the Heliens or for Palestinians that is allegorizing. And I think that ultimately, I think there's, again, I want to kind of put this here, I think there is enough nuance in this episode that it can gesture at those things, but I don't think it is digging deep enough, especially given the situation that is currently ongoing, that this is directly relating itself to, that I don't think it does enough. And I think that is ultimately a really big problem with this episode. And I'm going to chalk up again to the fact that, I'm going to try and edit around it because I'm tired and I don't have enough time. So there's a couple things here and there in my initial review that come through that don't make this clear. The more I thought about it as I was editing, the more I'm no, I think this is actually a really big problem with this episode, and that's where my stance is right now. So if there's a couple things here and there as I edit this video because I'm tired that didn't make that as clear, I want to make it explicitly clear here, because I do think there are some nuances that this episode does get right, but it doesn't go far enough, and as a result of not going far enough, it leaves things on the table and unsaid that could be taken in really dark and bad ways, and doesn't necessarily put its critique where it should be, especially given the very important context of what this episode is going out into. But then you also have Cora, but then you also have the person who's assisting Kid, who seems to want to help him, but also is much more conflicted about this whole situation. And this is ultimately what I liked about this episode, but I ultimately think because of its runtime and what it was trying to do so much with, it ultimately wasn't able to fully explore, because I like that we get a spectrum here. We get someone like Cora, who is trying to, sand off, quite literally, like just pass, not have to deal with this, just be accepted by society, but also may want to try to do things within the system to try to help, like singing the song at the end, which I'll get to in a moment. But then we also have Kid, who like goes all the way on the other end, and then we have the girl whose name I forget, who is kind of more conflicted in the middle, wanting to take sort of more revolutionary action, but not necessarily being gung-ho about murdering all these people, enabling it, sure, in this episode, which is ultimately kind of why I would have liked to see more of her perspective, to really get that spectrum of how people feel about reacting to being colonized, exploited, and their reactions to it. And I think there shows a lot of nuance in these characterizations that I ultimately wish the show had given more time to, because I think there's some really interesting stuff here, and shows that Juno understands a lot of these elements, but didn't get enough time to showcase them all, but manages to not fall into traps that I particularly dislike with these things. And the other element that I want to point out is the song that Cora sings at the end, which is a really beautiful song that's evoking pain and loss and trauma and what has been taken. And these images of the poppies was so evocative, and it brought a tear to my eye, actually. But what I was worried that it was going to do, which was she was going to sing the song, and we get this sense that like, oh, well, that song changed and melted everyone's hearts and minds, and they, tried to fix the Hellions planet, and everything was right in the end, and everyone realized that the corporation was wrong. Kind of doing the Detroit Become Human ending, which I also would have hated, because that would have also been too naive about how systems of exploitation and also how prejudice built on like layered propaganda against a group of people for probably decades and centuries works. But what it does is, for lack of a better word, humanize the Hellions, humanize her. And so to some people, it might be a spark to get them to see her, again, for lack of a better word, as more of a person or more human. But it's not going to completely tear down the system and change everything. And I really, really liked that was, again, another nuance on the other side of things that this episode understood, that wasn't going to revolutionarily change the system, but there are moments of how it can humanize and it can change people's perspective. And also, again, evoke loss and pain and what was taken through exploitation, the history taken, the culture taken, the people taken. So I really, really like that. And again, it's something I would just have liked a little bit more time with, because I think there's a lot of nuance and understanding in how this was depicted in the spectrum of the Hellions that we got in this episode. So really excellent on that part, and leaves me wanting more and wishing we had gotten a little bit more, but made me very excited for Juno's work going forward. So really, really enjoyed this. Couple other small things before we get to the big thing. We got a couple cameos here. Graham Norton, I know, and it just speaks to Russell T Davies' sort of style. Again, I know Russell didn't write the episode, but it is kind of in his style of like, having cameos from modern day figures in shows. So I know Graham Norton. I was like, oh, Graham Norton, that's cute. Russell has done that sort of stuff with like You Are the Weakest Link, Goodbye from way back in series 1 of Doctor Who. And he's done that a few times throughout Doctor Who history. I think even last season there was like a British reporter who appeared in 73 Yards as well, sort of as a future version of him in that time, himself in that timeline. There was also another cameo by the guy who was hosting Eurovision, who came out of Cryo Freeze. I'm going to be frank, I actually don't know who he is. Maybe it's because I don't know Eurovision, or he's a UK presenter. I legitimately did not know who he is. So when Belinda said his name, it's like, oh, is that, I forget who, Harvey, I think is his name. I forget who it was. I know all of you are probably yelling at my screen, especially those of you who are in the UK probably are like, how do you not know him? I didn't know. So I'm like, am I supposed to know who that is? Like, is he a character who's been here before? I had to like look him up and like go on the Doctor Who wiki. Like, did I miss him in like a previous episode? No, he's just a real dude who's in the episode. And that's just one of those things where like, if you don't know the guy, it can throw you off a little bit. But if you do, it's cute. But I always worry about those sort of things, about if it's going to cause the episode to age badly. I mean, I look back, not that it was a great episode to begin with, but going back to series 1 of Russell Davies' first run on Doctor Who with the 9th Doctor, we have You Are the Weakest Link in the Big Brother, I think was the other like reality show thing that episode pulls from, and that did not age well at all. Not that it was particularly great at the time, but it's aged much worse because no one has like any touchstones for those shows anymore, really. Especially people who are coming to the show new and fresh. So, like, I kind of still get it because I remember watching The Weakest Link and all that jazz, but I think new people coming in to be like, is this the thing that the show just made up? Like, what is this show? This is weird. So I worry if that'll happen again here. I think it'll be less of a problem because the episode's so less directly dealing with like the Graham Norton cameo and everything, but he is here. So I like Graham Norton. I think he's cool. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting just little moment. So this showed two different versions of cameos that worked. Like, oh, I know him, didn't know him, so lost on me. So just kind of funny on that front. All right, the last two things. We do get the appearance of Susan with the original actor who played her way back in all the way back at the beginning of Doctor Who, which is really, really cool. I like that she's evoked as a memory that the Doctor's pulling from to sort of motivate himself. Thought that was really, really cool. I think they're clearly setting up, I think she said find me or something like that at one point. So I think they're clearly setting her up to come back in the next two episodes, or maybe after the next two episodes, like kind of like Mrs. Flood was set up last season and then, is now being paid off here. Maybe they're setting up Susan to appear next series or whatever, but it feels like she's probably going to show up in the next two episodes. But that being said, even if she doesn't, I would like this. I actually kind of enjoy this as like, when the Doctor thinks he might be dying out in space, he thinks of her. And I think that that's actually a really cool thing, and that actually kind of motivates him a little bit. So even if we never get more of Susan, I would think that this would be very cool. But again, it looks like they're setting her up. So I really enjoyed that appearance quite a lot. I thought it was very restrained and cute, but it felt like it revealed a lot about the Doctor himself without it feeling like an overdone sort of thing. So I really did enjoy that. The last thing I need to mention, obviously, is we get not only the reveal of who Mrs. Flood is, but also another bi-generation, because she is in fact the Ronnie. I will say this right up front. I do not know know the Ronnie all that well. I have not seen much of classic Doctor Who. I've only seen little bits here and there, and I've not seen any of the Ronnie episodes, so I have no tie to who the Ronnie is. I know a little bit about her just generally, but not anything that I've personally seen. So the reveal is like, okay, cute. But it does set me up a kind of like, okay, I'm interested to see where this is going to go. The other thing that I'm sure is ultimately going to be controversial is the reappearance of bi-generation and Mrs. Flood sort of regenerating into the original Mrs. Flood and then the new version of the Ronnie that we get. I feel like some people, I haven't really seen and dug into the reaction, but I'm sure that that's probably ultimately controversial for the same reason the original bi-generation was. I wasn't a huge fan of the initial bi-generation. I ended up coming around to it and liking it for what it's done, and the fact that we have not seen David Tennant come back as the bi-generated Doctor after that episode, which I think is good. I think we shouldn't see him again, as much as I love my David Tennant. But yeah, I was a little bit hesitant on it, but I've come around on liking it and liking what he did with it. And here though, but my initial reaction was negative. Here though, I actually really kind of like it for two reasons. One, I think it's good to see bi-generation pop up every once in a while, to sort of solidify it as just a thing that can happen. So I don't mind it appearing every once in a while. If it becomes the norm, like every single time we see a Time Lord, whether they be the Master, the Ronnie, or, the Doctor, or whoever else we may see in the future, bi-generating every single time, that will get bothersome and annoying to me. But I like it here because it sort of showcases, okay, it's a thing that can just happen every once in a while. And what makes it especially work for me in this episode is it, complicates things for the Doctor, because now he has to deal with two versions of the Ronnie, quote unquote, which I think is like, that's a way to make bi-generation not like an easy thing. It actually makes things now more complicated for the Doctor going forward, because now he has two to ultimately deal with. So I like that instead of it helping now, it's complicating things. So that's really nice. And then B, I like that the Ronnie has a distinct perspective on bi-generation, that Mrs. Flood, the original one that like we've been watching for a while, she is not the Ronnie, she is a Ronnie and is subordinate to the Ronnie. And the original, I'm calling her original, Mrs. Flood, I'll call her, is fully on board with understanding that she is the subordinate one, saying, yes, ma'am, like following orders directly from her. That's interesting, and that's unique, and that's a different take on bigeneration than the Doctor has. So the fact that it makes things more complicated for the Doctor because now he has more to deal with, and also the Ronnie has a completely different perspective on how bigeneration works, makes it land for me because it's evolving the concept. It's not just doing it again, it is doing something new with it in a really intriguing way. So I would not want this to become the norm. However, it works here for me and actually makes me kind of interested and intrigued to see what ultimately Russell's going to be doing with it in the final 2 episodes of this season. So really enjoyed that. So ultimately, like I said, I really did enjoy this episode on the whole. Oh, I forgot to mention, the side characters in this episode were really, really good, especially the couple that the Doctor works with. We haven't gotten enough of the sort of like one-off characters that really help the Doctor that have been fully characterized. We got even, I forget the name of the episode, but the episode from earlier on this season that was like the Midnight sequel. Like there was side characters in that, but for my taste, they weren't fully developed, and it kind of frustrated me outside of the main girl from that. But like these are two characters who just show up, get a little bit of characterization, and they're a lot of fun. That reminds me of the two cat ladies in or was it the cat ladies? The two lesbians in like the car episode of David Tennant's run when they were all trapped in that traffic jam. I just like it's like they show up, they have a little bit of characterization, they're really cool, they're really fun, I enjoy them, and you get a tiny little arc between the two of them, like coming to like the Doctor, but then also like reconciling themselves as well and seeing each other for their talents that they were sort of missing earlier on in the episode. Like it's nothing huge or revelatory, but it's solid and works, and they're enjoyable and fun to have around. So I missed that sort of stuff. Anyways, that was the last sort of thing that I wanted to mention. But yeah, I really enjoyed this episode quite a lot, but ultimately it's one of those ones where I'm like, I wish it had a little bit more time. If we had just had a little bit more time with it, I feel like there's a lot of nuance here that was kind of left on the table. But what nuance we did get to see, I thought was really well handled. So I think that's ultimately for the better. It's like I'd rather be left wanting more than and feeling like you at least gave me enough to get the taste of these characters and kind of get the spectrum of stuff that you're trying to show and show me that you have the nuance there than either wanting feeling like we didn't get enough, or let me put it this way, or feeling that like there wasn't the nuance there, and being like, you didn't really understand this at all. Like I want more, but I can clearly see that the thought was put into this. I think that's what I'm trying to say. All right. That is my review of the Intergalactic Song Contest. We now have the 2-parter coming up in the next few weeks for Doctor Who as the season comes to a close, and potentially it's time on Disney Plus, ? Who knows, even though we're also going to get that Land and Sea spin-off thing with Unit. Who the hell knows what's going on with that. We'll see where it's going to go, but I'm excited for the finales. We'll see how this is going to go with the Ronnie, but beyond all of that, I hope you, my friends, live long and prosper. I'm going to crash and sleep because I'm tired.